For 22 years, James Porter drove Cary Grant to movie sets, premieres, parties, everywhere. The whole world saw Cary Grant smile, that famous, effortless, charming smile. But in 22 years, James never saw it. Not once. Not in the car. Because the car was the only place Cary Grant didn't have to pretend. James Porter started working as a private chauffeur in Los Angeles in 1955. He was 28 years old, former military, disciplined, discreet, good at staying invisible. In 1958, he was hired by Cary Grant. It was supposed to be a temporary position. It lasted 22 years. Cary Grant was one of the biggest movie stars in the world. Handsome, sophisticated, charming, the kind of man everyone wanted to be or be with. And James's job was simple. Drive him wherever he needed to go, keep his schedule, don't talk unless spoken to, and never, ever repeat anything you hear. The first day James drove Cary Grant, he was nervous. He'd seen all the movies. North by Northwest, To Catch a Thief, The Philadelphia Story. Cary Grant was elegance personified. James expected him to be charming in person, too. Witty, warm. But when Grant got in the car that first morning, he didn't say hello, didn't smile, just said, "Paramount Studios, please," and stared out the window. James drove. Grant was silent the entire way. When they arrived, Grant got out, and suddenly he was Cary Grant again, smiling, waving, shaking hands. The transformation was instant, but in the car, he'd been someone else entirely. Someone tired, someone distant, someone who didn't want to perform. That became the pattern. For 22 years, James drove Cary Grant an average of 5 days a week, sometimes more. And in all that time, Grant almost never spoke in the car. He'd get in, say the destination, and then retreat into silence. He'd stare out the window. Sometimes he'd close his eyes. Sometimes he'd read scripts. But he never made small talk, never joked, never smiled. At first, James thought he'd done something wrong, that Grant didn't like him. But then James started to notice something. Every time they arrived at a destination, Grant would take a deep breath, sit up straighter, adjust his tie, and then the moment he opened the car door, the smile would appear. Perfect, effortless, like flipping a switch. James realized the car was the only place Cary Grant could turn off, the only place he didn't have to be Cary Grant. And James's job wasn't just to drive, it was to protect that space, to let Grant be whoever he was when he wasn't performing. So James stopped trying to make conversation. He just drove, and Grant seemed grateful for it. Over the years, James learned things about Cary Grant that nobody else knew. He learned that Grant hated parties. Every time James drove him to a premiere or a gala, Grant would sit in the back seat, silent, dreading it. But the moment he stepped out, he was the life of the party, charming everyone, making it look effortless. James learned that Grant was lonely, desperately lonely. He'd been married 4 times by the time James started driving him, and James drove him to divorce lawyers twice during their 22 years together. Each time, Grant would sit in the back seat, staring out the window, not saying a word, and James would see his reflection in the rearview mirror, the sadness in his eyes, the exhaustion. James learned that Grant didn't like being Cary Grant. One time in 1966, they were stuck in traffic on Sunset Boulevard. Grant had been silent for 20 minutes. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Do you know my real name, James?" James said, "No, sir." Grant said, "Archibald Leach. I was born Archibald Leach, from Bristol, England. Poor family, rough childhood. I created Cary Grant because I wanted to be someone else, someone better. And it worked, but now I'm stuck being him. And I don't know how to stop." James didn't know what to say. Grant went quiet again, and they never talked about it again. But James never forgot it. The idea that Cary Grant, the man everyone wanted to be, didn't want to be himself. In 1979, Grant retired from acting. He was 75 years old. He'd made 72 films. He was a legend. But he told James he was done. He didn't want to perform anymore. He wanted to be Archie again. Just Archie. James kept driving him, but the destinations changed. No more studios, no more premieres, just errands, the bank, the grocery store, the park. and slowly James started to see something he'd never seen before. Grant started to relax. He'd make small comments in the car, about the weather, about traffic. Nothing deep, but it was something. He was letting his guard down, just a little. Then, in November 1986, Grant called James and asked him to drive him to the airport. He was going to Davenport, Iowa, to do a speaking tour. One last appearance. James picked him up, and they drove to LAX. It was a quiet drive, like always. But when they arrived, Grant didn't get out right away. He sat there for a moment. Then he said, "James, can I ask you something?" James said, "Of course, sir." Grant said, "In all these years, did you ever wonder why I never talked in the car?" James thought about lying, about saying no. But he'd been with Grant for 22 years. He owed him honesty. He said, "Yes, sir, I did wonder." Grant nodded. He looked out the window at the airport, at the people rushing by, at the chaos, and he said, "Because the car was the only place I could be nobody. Everyone else wanted Cary Grant. The studios wanted Cary Grant. The fans wanted Cary Grant. My wives wanted Cary Grant. But in the car, I could just be tired. I could just be sad. I could just be a man who didn't have to smile. And you let me. You never asked me to perform. You just drove. And that was the greatest gift anyone ever gave me." James felt a lump in his throat. He said, "It was an honor, sir." Grant smiled. And for the first time in 22 years, James saw Cary Grant smile in the car. Not the movie star smile, not the charming, effortless smile, but a real smile. Small, grateful, human. Grant said, "Thank you, James, for 22 years of silence. It was the loudest kindness I ever received." Then he got out of the car and walked into the airport. James watched him go, and he had a feeling he'd never see him again. 3 days later, James got a phone call. Cary Grant had died. Heart attack. In Davenport, Iowa. He was 82 years old. James went to the funeral. He stood in the back, didn't talk to anyone, just paid his respects. Not to Cary Grant, the movie star, but to Archibald Leach, the man who spent his whole life pretending to be someone else. The man who was so good at it that he forgot how to stop. After the funeral, James received a letter. It was from Grant's estate. Inside was a check and a handwritten note. The note said, "James, thank you for driving me for 22 years. But more than that, thank you for letting me be silent. In a world that always wanted me to perform, you gave me permission to just exist. That's rare. That's precious. I hope you know how much it meant. Yours, Archie." James kept that note for the rest of his life. He framed it, put it on his wall, and every time he looked at it, he thought about Cary Grant sitting in the back seat, staring out the window, not smiling, just being, just existing, just trying to remember who he was before he became someone else. I drove Cary Grant for 22 years, and I never saw him smile, not in the car, because the car was the only place he didn't have to. The world demanded Cary Grant, charming, elegant, perfect. But in the car, he could be Archibald Leach, tired, sad, human. And what I learned is this: sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is not asking them to be anything, not asking them to perform, not asking them to smile, just letting them exist, in silence, in peace, without expectation. That's love, that's respect, that's the kindness we all need but rarely receive. This was a quiet witness. If this story moved you, share it with someone who's tired of performing, someone who needs permission to just be. Because we all have a version of ourselves we show the world, and we all need a place where we can take off the mask. I'll see you in the next story.